Davante Adams to the Jets, Amari Cooper to the Bills. We go over some potential Ravens targets that are still out there. Yannick Ngakoue was signed to the active roster. We'll talk about how Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are on a historic pace this season. All that and more in today's episode of the Flock Rundown.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.
What's up, Ravens fans? My name is Ryan, and welcome back to another episode of the Flock Rundown. So Davante Adams is officially a Jet. I'm not that surprised. And Amari Cooper has went to the Bills. I am a little surprised by that. I guess not that Amari Cooper got moved, but an aggressive move by the Bills, a smart move by the Bills. I think that they just got a lot better. The Browns obviously get a lot worse. There's kind of a dumpster fire situation going over there right now. But as a Ravens fan, all these moves as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline just got me thinking about what potential options the Ravens have, what kind of moves make sense. Let's start with wide receiver Courtland Sutton. I've mentioned his name before, and I think he fits the mold of a big body wide receiver that the Ravens don't really have. I know we could probably throw more jump balls to guys like Bateman, but we just haven't. I think right now, if we got a jump ball guy, it's probably Isaiah Likely. So if we're going to add a receiver for depth and just a different type of receiver to complement Zay and Bateman, I think a big-bodied X receiver that can just go up and get it, win contested catch battles, I think that that is what the Ravens could plug into this offense. Courtland Sutton does make sense stylistically, but when I dove into the contract numbers, I feel like he is a higher risk because he has a $20 million cap hit next year. So if you did trade for Sutton, and I don't think he'd be commanding a really high draft pick, maybe a fourth rounder, if you did trade for Sutton, you'd have to probably extend him, and he is turning 30. He's not a young receiver, and you'd have to spread that money out. So I wouldn't say it's off the table, but that's a bigger cap hit than I think the Ravens would like to deal with, especially when they have so many contracts coming up, like Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, Odafe Owe if they want, Brandon Stevens. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made, and I'm not sure that they want to tie themselves to a wide receiver making $20 million. We've clearly just continued to draft wide receivers and stay pretty cheap, or we bring in the older veteran that's on that expiring deal where you're not committed to it too much. And that leads me to DeAndre Hopkins. I think that DeAndre Hopkins fits the type of receiver mold that we're looking for, and also doesn't come with an enormous contract commitment or risk. He would essentially just be a rental for the rest of this season. We may have to clear a tiny bit of cap room through a restructure to fit him under this year's current cap. I think that this move would make the most sense, and you probably could even give up less than a fourth round pick because he's a 32-year-old receiver whose contract is expiring. I don't know what he's going to fetch in the open market at his age, but I just think that this is the type of older veteran receiver that the Ravens could bring in. I think it fits stylistically because it complements Zay and Bateman with a different style of ball. Hopkins has played at a really high level throughout the majority of his career. I know he's had some injury problems and hasn't had a ton of success consistently in Tennessee, but he's not going to need to have a ton of success if he came to a place like Baltimore. He would just be one of the guys. You know, I'm not saying that he'd come in here and be a go-to guy. I would say Zay's still going to be that go-to wide receiver, but Hopkins would be an amazing compliment. I'm sure he'd want to come play for a winning team. He's mentioned in the past on podcasts that he would love to play with Lamar Jackson.
I've been a fan of Lamar for a long time. So, you know, obviously he's one of the greats. And, you know, I would be lying to sit here and say, you know, it wouldn't be an honor one day, you know, if my career allows me to play that long, to play with a great guy and a great quarterback like Lamar.
He clearly is close with Derrick Henry, who just left the Tennessee Titans, so they would be reunited. I think that DeAndre Hopkins, if we're going to bring in a wide receiver, makes the most sense. It's the most Ravens type of move when it comes to bringing in an older veteran receiver who is not a big financial commitment, and I just think it makes sense from all angles. I think that this would boost our receiver room. It would add some needed depth. I understand all the comments about we're fine, you know, Zay and Bateman are good enough, and I agree. I completely agree. And we actually said this before the season started, that if all the receivers stay healthy, I think that this unit is good enough to win it all and go on a run and be a really successful team. And we're seeing that. We're the best offense in the NFL. but we're thin at wide receiver, and I dare you to argue it. If Zay and Bateman miss any extended period of time, the Ravens are back in a hole. So I just think adding another guy for cheap with no future commitment like a DeAndre Hopkins makes so much sense. This is just a low risk, high reward trade for the Ravens, and it boosts a position group that I think is pretty top heavy and could be really thin with any injuries. So I'd like to get another wide receiver in there if we are going to make a move. Another option that I don't think is as likely but does make some sense is going out and bringing back Jadeveon Clowney. I think that this would be a really cheap trade. You could probably give up a 5th or 6th round pick. The main issue is that he does have a $14 million cap hit next year, so you would have to move that money around. There's also another couple variables if he wants to stay close to his family, because I think that that's the main reason that he went to the Panthers in the first place. And then the Ravens also just signed Yannick Ngakoue to their active roster, so they did make a pass rush move, so it would be kind of a lot to go then trade for another pass rusher. So I would say that the Ravens are probably set there. I'm just trying to think of position groups and players that make sense that we would still go out and make a move for. And pass rush seems to be one that we could bolster, but I would say that's a lot more unlikely than adding a DeAndre Hopkins to the receiver room. I think that that makes more sense. I'm also hearing a lot of Ravens fans saying that we need to go get secondary help, and that's what we need to trade for, whether that's corners or safeties. I agree that our secondary has to play better. There's no doubt about it. But I can't see us going and trading for a corner or safety because we have so much already invested in those two positions. We just went out and drafted Nate Wiggins, first-round corner, who's definitely on the rise. We still got Brandon Stevens, who's not playing awful. You know, he definitely needs to improve his ball tracking, but he's still a great corner. Marlon Humphrey's playing great this year. Our safeties, Eddie Jackson and Marcus Williams, have not lived up to their investment, I would say. You know, Marcus Williams is on a pretty big contract, but we're tied to that contract right now. So if you're talking about future moves after this season, then we could definitely talk about moving on from Marcus Williams. But there's no way we're about to go trade for a safety unless he's involved in the trade. But I don't think this is a great time to trade Marcus Williams either. With that contract and with the way he's playing, his value's low. So we're not going to go trade for a safety and bench Marcus Williams. It's just not going to happen. He's too much of an investment. He's too talented of a player. He's had too much previous success. I think that this entire secondary gets back going as the weeks go. I just feel like the Ravens have too much money invested in the secondary right now. They've made moves in free agency, getting Eddie Jackson. They've made big moves in the draft, getting Nate Wiggins. They've put a lot of effort into this secondary. And I feel like they're just going to let these guys get better and play it out. Kind of like the offensive line struggled for a couple games to start the year. For some reason, this secondary is really struggling to start this season. And I think that they're going to let these talented players figure it out. So I just can't see them making a big move to bring in more help there this season. But we'll see. The trade deadline's still a few weeks away. We're probably going to talk about this a couple more times, especially as more moves around the league start to happen. But right now, as it stands, my move that makes the most sense for the Ravens is DeAndre Hopkins. I mentioned earlier that the Ravens signed Yannick Ngakoue to their active roster, so he's safe. He can't be signed off the practice squad. They pretty much had to do this. He's been playing pretty well. I think his snap percentage is going to increase, and he's a part of the Ravens for the rest of the year now. So no more practice squad elevations for Yannick. That did lead the Ravens to then have to go cut guys, and they ended up cutting Saleh, who they drafted last year at guard. And they cut Pepe Williams again and signed inside linebacker Christian Welch, who was on the Ravens in the past. So that's definitely a special teams move. John Harbaugh is not happy with the special teams. He mentioned in his press conference that there's so many rookies out there. They've been booting the ball through the end zone because they don't trust them to play the kick return well. So I think that they're trying to get as much special teams help as they can so that they can start trying to kick in the landing zone and trying to hold teams back a little bit. But this is where we're at for now. Those are the main moves this week. I definitely think signing Yannick Ngakoue to the active roster is the Ravens' pass rush help move, and I like it. I think that he's played really well. He's got a lot of pressures. He's got a sack, and he's not even getting a ton of snaps. So I think that his snap load will increase, and he's just a veteran presence in the room. Nice depth for that pass rush, and I think that we need it. We need to make sure that we're getting home to the quarterbacks fast, and Yannick Ngakoue is going to help that. Let's move on to some more awards for the Ravens. Derrick Henry, Player of the Week again. This is the second time this year. He also got a Player of the Month, so Derrick Henry's just racking up AFC Player of the Week and Player of the Month awards. I think this is his 9th in his career, but 2nd this season already. And he's on pace for 2,000 rushing yards, man. Like, let's let that sink in for a second. Now, I'm not sure how the pace will continue. Maybe we need to conserve him a little bit for the playoffs. You know, you definitely don't want to chase 2K and then Henry's worn out for the playoffs, but he never really seems to be that kind of back. You know, he takes such good care of his body. He's a genetic freak. I just feel like Henry is the type of back that could pull that off and still be fine for the playoffs, especially with how balanced our offense is right now. So I'm rooting for the 2K. I think that that would be awesome, but if it does come at an expense for Derrick Henry's availability or freshness in the playoffs, then I'll pass on the 2K. I'd rather have a fresh Derrick Henry for the playoffs. But being on pace for 2,000 rushing yards just shows how dominant of a season Derrick Henry's having. He leads the league in rushing by over 100 rushing yards, and nobody's ever gotten 2,000 rushing yards twice. So Derrick Henry has done that before. If he did it again this season, he'd be the only running back ever, only player ever to rush for 2,000 yards twice. And that's a pretty big accomplishment. Lamar Jackson is also on pace for his best season, and that is 4,000 passing yards and 1,000 rushing yards, which would almost guarantee him his 3rd MVP and back-to-back MVPs. So I'm definitely rooting for all of that to happen, because that means our offense is rolling at the same pace that it is right now for the rest of the season. I'm not expecting every game to go beautifully. This is the NFL. This is a week-to-week league. There's going to be some division matches against the Steelers or something where our offense just can't get it going like we have been. But for the most part, I feel like our offense is going to be able to stay this balanced, this multiple. So I don't see why this couldn't be Lamar Jackson's best season of his career. Whether he gets 4,000 passing, 1,000 rushing or not, I don't know. Whether Derrick Henry gets 2,000 rushing yards, I don't know. This is a hell of a pace to keep up. But the fact that through 6 weeks they are on pace for this really just shows you how dominant of a 6 weeks this has been. So blessed to be a Ravens fan, man. I'm happy that Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are on this team. We need to enjoy this ride as much as possible. And on to Tampa Bay, man. Huge game Monday night. We'll have a game preview episode later in the week. The Ravens are delayed a day of practicing, so we'll get into all the injury report updates and everything that's going on over these next few days. But just wanted to come on here and talk a little trade talk and just some general Ravens updates. But let me know what you guys are thinking about the trades. Who would you go get? Who makes the most sense? Do we even need to make a move? The roster is really strong and we're rolling right now. Is this a chance that we don't make a move at the trade deadline this year? Let me know what you guys think. And as always, I appreciate you tuning in to another episode of the Flock Rundown. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll let the greatest linebacker in the history of the game, Ray Lewis, take us out.
Ravens Flock. Flock Rundown is the place to be. My man Ryan has been a lifelong Ravens fan since he was born. The Flock Rundown. Nothing gets better than waking up and wondering how high we can fly. Tune in.
Motionless brainwaves attempt to swim their way to sense, can't tame the untamed.